My name is Elena Carter, and when this story began, I was 22 years old, with very little money and even fewer opportunities. Life had never been particularly kind to me, but I had always believed that if I worked hard enough, something better would eventually come along. That hope was the only thing keeping me going at the time. One rainy afternoon, while flipping through old job listings in a newspaper at a small cafe, I found an advertisement that caught my attention. A wealthy businessman was seeking a live-in maid to care for his 2 young children. The salary was much higher than anything I had seen before. At first, I thought it must be a mistake. Jobs like that were not usually offered to someone like me. Still, I wrote down the address and decided to try my luck. The next morning, I took a bus across the city and walked down a quiet road lined with tall trees and expensive houses. When I reached the address, I stopped in front of a large iron gate and stared at the enormous mansion behind it. I had never seen a house that big in my life. For a moment, I wondered if I should turn around and leave. Someone like me probably didn't belong in a place like that. But I needed the job too badly to walk away. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the doorbell. A few seconds later, the heavy front door opened. Standing in front of me was a tall man in his mid-30s. He had dark hair and sharp features, but what I noticed most were his eyes. They looked exhausted, almost as if he hadn't slept properly in a long time. There was a sadness in them that was impossible to ignore. "You're here about the maid position?" he asked in a calm but distant voice. "Yes, sir," I replied politely. "My name is Elena Carter." He studied me for a moment before stepping aside. "I'm Daniel Hayes," he said. "Come in." As I entered the house, I immediately felt overwhelmed. The place was breathtaking. The floors were polished marble, and expensive paintings hung on the walls. Elegant furniture filled the rooms and everything looked perfect. But despite all the beauty, something felt strange. The house was completely silent. There was no music, no laughter, no sense of warmth. It felt more like a museum than a home. Daniel showed me around quietly. As we walked down the long hallway, I noticed several framed photographs hanging on the walls. Almost all of them showed the same woman. She was incredibly beautiful, with long, dark hair and delicate features. But in every photograph, her expression seemed distant and sad. She looked like someone trapped in a life she couldn't escape. I wondered who she was, but I didn't dare ask. Eventually, Daniel led me into a large living room where 2 small children sat on the floor drawing pictures. "They're my children," he said. The kids looked up at me. They were twins, a boy and a girl, both around 7 years old. The boy had messy brown hair and curious eyes, while the girl had long hair tied neatly into braids. "This is Elena," Daniel told them. "She will be helping around the house from now on." The twins simply stared at me. "Hello," I said gently, smiling at them. But they didn't respond. They didn't say a single word. Instead, they quietly returned to their drawing. The silence in the room became uncomfortable. Daniel seemed to notice my confusion. "Their names are Lucas and Lily," he explained. "They've been quieter than usual this past year." I didn't ask any questions, but I already suspected the reason. A few moments later, Daniel spoke again. "Their mother passed away last year," he said simply. My heart sank. Everything suddenly made sense. The sadness in his eyes, the silence in the house, and the way the children avoided speaking. "I'm sorry," I said softly. Daniel nodded but didn't respond. That was the moment I realized this job was not going to be easy. It wasn't just about cleaning rooms or cooking meals. This house was filled with grief, and every person living there was carrying a piece of it. Still, I needed the job, so I accepted the position that very day. My new life began inside that quiet mansion. I was given a small room on the second floor, near the children's bedrooms. It wasn't large, but it was comfortable enough. Compared to my previous living conditions, it felt almost luxurious. Every day followed the same routine. I cleaned the enormous house, prepared dinner, washed dishes, and spent time looking after Lucas and Lily. At first, the children barely spoke. They answered my questions with short words or simply nodded. Most of the time, they just sat quietly with their toys. I had never met children so silent before, but I tried my best to be patient. I read them stories at night, helped them with their drawings, and played small games to make them smile. Slowly, very slowly, something began to change. One evening, while we were sitting on the floor drawing pictures together, Lucas suddenly made a silly face at his sister. Lily burst into laughter. It was the first time I had ever heard either of them laugh. The sound was so unexpected that I froze for a moment, staring at them in surprise. Their laughter filled the room like sunlight entering a dark place. Then I noticed someone standing in the doorway. It was Daniel. I hadn't realized he was there. He stood quietly, watching the children. His expression looked different than usual, softer, almost hopeful. "They haven't laughed like that in a long time," he said quietly. For some reason, hearing those words made my heart beat faster. It was the first time Daniel had spoken to me about something personal. At that moment, I began to understand something important. This house didn't just need a maid. It needed warmth. It needed life. And somehow, without realizing it, I had already begun bringing a little of that back. But I had no idea that someone else would soon arrive, someone who would make my life inside that mansion far more complicated than I ever expected. Life inside the mansion slowly began to change during the following weeks. The silence that once filled every corner of the house was no longer as heavy as before. Lucas and Lily were still quiet children, but they were starting to trust me. Sometimes they would ask me to play with them in the garden, and occasionally I even heard them whispering and giggling together. Those small moments meant everything to me. Daniel also seemed different. He still spent most of his time working in his office, but he began coming out more often in the evenings. Sometimes he would sit quietly in the living room while the children and I played board games or drew pictures together. He rarely joined us, but I could feel that he was watching carefully, almost as if he was afraid the happiness might disappear if he moved too quickly. One evening, Lucas proudly showed his father a drawing he had made. It was a simple picture of our house, but there were 4 stick figures standing in front of it. Daniel looked at the drawing for a long time. "Who are these people?" he asked gently. Lucas pointed at the figures one by one. "Meet Lily, Elena." Then he hesitated before pointing at the last one. "And you?" Daniel's eyes softened in a way I had never seen before. For a brief moment, the sadness that usually lived on his face seemed to disappear. But that peaceful moment didn't last long. A few days later, someone unexpectedly arrived. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and found a woman standing outside. She looked elegant and confident, wearing expensive clothes and high heels that clicked sharply against the marble floor as she stepped inside. Her eyes quickly scanned the house before landing on me. "And you are?" she asked. "My name is Elena," I said politely. "I work here." The woman gave me a small, cold smile. "I see," she replied. "I'm Victoria Reed, Daniel's sister-in-law." I immediately understood. She was the sister of Daniel's late wife. Victoria walked through the house as if she owned it. Her movements were slow and careful, almost like she was inspecting everything. When the children saw her, they became quiet again. "Hello, Lucas." "Hello, Lily," she said. They greeted her politely, but the warmth they usually showed me was gone. It was as if her presence had brought the old sadness back into the room. Victoria noticed the drawings scattered across the table. "You're letting them play all afternoon?" she asked, glancing at me. "Yes," I replied. "They finished their schoolwork earlier." She frowned slightly. "Children need discipline," she said, "not constant entertainment." Her tone made me uncomfortable, but I didn't argue. Later that evening, I was washing dishes in the kitchen when Victoria walked in. The sound of her heels echoed across the floor. She leaned against the counter and watched me silently for a moment. "You seem very comfortable here," she said suddenly. "I'm just doing my job," I replied. Victoria laughed softly, but there was no kindness in it. "You think I don't see what's happening," she said. I looked at her, confused. "I don't understand." "Oh, I think you do," she continued. "You walk into this house, spend time with the children, and suddenly Daniel starts smiling again." Her words made my stomach tighten. "That's not my intention," I said quickly. "I'm only here to help." Victoria stepped closer. "Let me tell you something about this family. she whispered. The perfect little life you think you see here never existed. I didn't know how to respond. Daniel was never truly happy with my sister, she continued. He was always working, always traveling. Amelia spent most of her time alone in this huge house. Hearing the name Amelia made me think of the sad photographs on the walls. She was lonely, Victoria said, very lonely. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. So don't fool yourself, she added. Daniel isn't the kind of man who suddenly falls in love and lives happily ever after. He doesn't know how to love. Her words stayed in my mind long after she left the room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Victoria had said. Was Daniel really a cold man who only cared about work? Was the sadness I saw in him just guilt? Or was Victoria simply trying to push me away? Over the next few weeks, Victoria visited the house more often. Every time she came, she made sure I felt unwelcome. She criticized the way I organized the children's schedule. She complained about the meals I cooked. She even accused me of being too friendly with Lucas and Lily. They need structure, she would say, not someone treating them like friends. I tried my best to ignore her, but her words always hurt. One afternoon, we were all sitting in the living room while the children played with their building blocks on the carpet. Victoria sat elegantly on the sofa while Daniel reviewed some documents nearby. Suddenly, Victoria spoke. The children need a real mother, Daniel, she said calmly. The room went silent. Daniel slowly looked up from his papers. What do you mean? He asked. Victoria glanced at me before continuing. They need someone who can truly guide them, not just a young girl who plays games all day. My face burned with embarrassment. For a moment, I wished the floor would open and swallow me whole. But before I could say anything, Daniel spoke. Lucas and Lily are happier now than they have been in a long time, he said firmly, and Elena is the reason. I looked at him in shock. It was the first time he had defended me like that. Victoria's expression hardened. Well, she replied coldly, we'll see how long that lasts. She stood up and walked out of the room without another word. For a few moments, Daniel and I were left alone in the quiet living room, while the children continued playing on the floor. I didn't know what to say. Finally, Daniel spoke softly. You don't have to listen to her, he said. I nodded, but my heart was still racing. Then he stepped closer. Elena, he said gently, you've brought something back into this house that I thought was gone forever. I looked up at him. The way he was looking at me made my chest tighten. For the first time since I arrived, the distance between us no longer felt like the space between an employer and a maid. Something else was beginning to grow. There, something unexpected, and I had a feeling that whatever it was about to change everything. The moment Daniel said those words, the air between us felt different. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The living room was quiet except for the soft sounds of the children stacking their building blocks on the carpet. I tried to focus on their laughter, but my thoughts were spinning. I was only the maid. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But the way Daniel looked at me at that moment made it hard to believe things were still that simple. I should go finish dinner, I said quickly. Standing up, Daniel nodded slowly, though his eyes stayed on me as I walked toward the kitchen. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Victoria's words echoed in my mind, mixing with Daniel's gentle voice. One moment I felt hopeful, and the next moment I felt foolish for even imagining something more. I reminded myself that this was not my house. This was Amelia's house. I was just someone who had come here to work. The next morning began like any other day. I woke up early, prepared breakfast, and helped Lucas and Lily get ready for school. Daniel had already gone into his office by the time we finished eating. Everything felt normal again, until the front door suddenly opened. Victoria walked into the house without knocking, her heels striking sharply against the marble floor. Where is Daniel? She demanded. He's in his office, I answered. At that exact moment, Daniel stepped out of the hallway. When he saw me standing there, he gave me a small smile. It was simple but warm. Unfortunately, Victoria noticed. Her eyes moved from Daniel to me, then back to him again. What is going on here? She asked sharply. Daniel frowned. Victoria, but she ignored him and walked directly toward me. I warned you, she said coldly. You think you can come into my sister's home and steal her husband? My heart dropped. It's not like that, I said quickly. Victoria laughed bitterly. Oh please, she said loudly. You're nothing but a gold digger taking advantage of a grieving man. Her words felt like knives. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The worst part was that a small voice inside me whispered that she might be right. This had been Amelia's home, her family, her life, and I had stepped into it like I belonged there. Tears filled my eyes. I'm sorry, I whispered to Daniel. Then I turned and ran upstairs. Inside my room, I began packing my small suitcase with shaking hands. My vision blurred with tears as I folded my clothes. I had been foolish to think I could stay here. This house had never been meant for me. Just as I was closing the suitcase, I heard a knock on the door. Before I could answer, the door opened. Daniel stood there. He looked worried. Elena, he said softly. I wiped my tears quickly. She's right, I said, my voice trembling. I don't belong here. I'm just the maid. Daniel stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. No, he said firmly. The only thing that was wrong was my life before you came here. His words made me look up. He walked closer and sat on the edge of the bed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked directly into my eyes. Victoria told you that my marriage wasn't happy, he said. I nodded slowly. She wasn't lying, he continued quietly. Amelia and I were both lonely for a long time. We lived in the same house, but our hearts were far apart. I didn't know what to say. When she died, Daniel continued, I wasn't only grieving her, I was grieving the family I thought we might someday become. His voice grew softer. My world stopped moving after that. I felt my chest tighten. But then you arrived, he said. You brought laughter back into this house. You helped my children smile again. And somehow, you helped me feel alive again too. My heart began beating faster. The kiss we shared, he continued gently, wasn't a mistake. He reached for my hand. My only mistake was waiting too long to tell you how I feel. The room felt very quiet. Elena, he said softly, I'm falling in love with you. I stared at him, completely speechless. Please don't leave, he said. Let's build a real family together. For the first time since I arrived in that mansion, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I belonged there after all. 6 months passed. The house that once felt cold and silent had completely changed. Now it was filled with laughter. Lucas and Lily ran through the hallways playing games. Their drawings covered the refrigerator in the kitchen. Even the garden felt brighter than before. Victoria stopped visiting, and my old bedroom on the second floor became a guest room, because I no longer slept there. Instead, I shared the master bedroom with Daniel. He was no longer the sad, distant man I had met on my first day. The heaviness in his eyes had disappeared, replaced by warmth and kindness. One evening, we were sitting together in the garden while the children played nearby. Daniel gently took my hand. Are you happy, Elena? He asked. I looked around at the beautiful house, at the children laughing under the sunset, and at the man beside me. Yes, I said with a smile, more than I ever imagined. 6 months ago, I arrived here as a maid looking for a job. Soon, I would become Daniel's wife. Life had taken me somewhere I never expected. But sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the most unexpected places. Love can appear when you least expect it, and kindness, patience, and a little courage can heal even the saddest hearts. If you enjoyed this story and want to improve your English through emotional stories like this, please support my channel, English Shadowing Stories. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss new English stories that help you learn vocabulary, listening, and storytelling in a fun way. See you in the next story on English Shadowing Stories.